Hello and welcome to our webinar session for MSPs. We're going to provide an evaluation guide framework for managed SD-WAN services. We've got a panel today. Bernard Breton is Chief Executive Officer of Adaptiv Networks, and Ashish Jain is a CEO and co-founder for KAIROS Strategic Consulting. These are both really sharp guys, and they provide a lot of fresh perspectives on the SD-WAN market. Myself, I'm Todd Davis. I'm the Director of Marketing for Adaptiv Networks, and I'll just be coordinating the show, but I wanted to pass it over now to get started over to Ashish. Why don't you say hello and then pass it along to Bernard to start the presentation.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you very much, Todd. This is Bernard here, and it will be my pleasure to discuss how to evaluate the right type of SD-WAN solution for a managed service provider. So let's get to it right away. Let's talk about an example that I will be using here to relate to in order to explain the relevance of SD-WAN in the context of the offering of a managed service provider. We all eat, or most of us, almost all of us, do eat hamburgers. In 1953, when Morris and Richard McDonald in Downey, California, opened the first McDonald's, they revolutionized restaurants by simplifying the menu and effectively making it much simpler to order and improving the efficiency of how food could be served. This has transformed tremendously that industry. And for several decades, things really haven't changed that much when it comes to fast food. After McDonald's invented the fast food experience, menus have changed a bit, breakfasts were offered, but realistically, pretty much these restaurants were run the same way they were ran in the early 50s, until recently. The fast food experience is going through a digitalization process, just like most businesses out there. In most countries now, at a McDonald's, or in fact many restaurants, McDonald's being just an example here, you have digital kiosks. And these digital kiosks allow the end customer to order the same food that you were ordering before those digital kiosks, but in a way that materially transforms the experience for the end customer. It reduced significantly the number of mistakes made during ordering, and it enabled, thanks to an environment whereby it's easier to use technologies such as AI, such as Amazon-like proposals as to what other customers like when they order certain things, increase the amount of revenue per customer in a very significant manner. This is an example of how business digital transformation is reshaping the way a very specific vertical is happening. Now, if we take a step back and we think, okay, is it really just about ordering food differently? No, it isn't. It is much broader than that. It is about improving the efficiency, the cost, and the quality of the food that is delivered to the end customer. And effectively, it is kind of transforming a restaurant chain into a logistic company which optimizes the transformation of the input product produced, which in case here is a cow and some other vegetables, into a sandwich that you can eat. Now, that might appear cruel for the cow, of course, but the reality is that by improving the whole chain of event, we're able to improve efficiency, quality of the product, and processes that are more reliable. This digitalization or digital transformation is making restaurants that are going through that, like McDonald's, becoming a digital first business. And the digital first businesses are always on. What we mean by this is that they consume applications that are in the cloud. Now take the example of McDonald's. You can't flip a burger without access to a cloud solution, which is what drives the online kiosk and also drives the triggering of what's being done in the kitchen. But a business, as a result of that, the business pushes the efficiency frontier. The end customer gets an engagement model that is much closer to the now very common instant gratification that we get from digital infrastructure. But all of that is only possible if network connectivity is available. Network connectivity has become something that is the lifeline of the digital first business. It is foundational to the ability for a business to engage in a digital transformation. And one of the reasons for this is that most of the digital assets and services that will be consumed will not be, of course, on-prem. They will not be in the restaurant. They will be in some cloud somewhere. They won't be in the clinic in healthcare. They will be in some cloud somewhere. And that is transforming the way businesses are seeing the market. The businesses are starting to realize that point-to-point private networks, such as MPLS, are ill-aligned to their new requirements, which are all about having low-cost internet connection, high reliability, but also the consumption of digital services that can be anywhere and not in simply a data center. And SD-WAN has been the solution by which this can be done. And effectively, the SD-WAN is therefore disrupting that very significant worldwide MPLS market, while at the same time disrupting the one edge network, basically all the devices that live at the edge and which are used in order to deliver the point-to-point connectivity between the data centers and the branch office. But let's take a step back and say, okay, well, there's a lot of SD-WAN solutions out there. Are they all the same? So to make it simple, I categorize them into two large groups in terms of what they are, which is the y-axis there, and the business model by which they are offered to the end customer. So if you put yourself now in the shoes of an end customer, and you think, okay, what I'm getting is, say, an edge device. What you're effectively buying is that has called itself SD-WAN. And there's a lot out there. I'm not going to name them on this call here, but about 50% of the SD-WAN solutions right now, they are effectively edge-only devices. What you're effectively buying is some form of a sophisticated branch router. And it is typically with a standard sort of very traditional hardware software model. You're going to buy a piece, an appliance, which will contain specialized software, and that's what makes it a sophisticated branch router, which does some form of SD-WAN-ish things, okay? But you're basically buying a router. Let's not kid yourself. That's what you're doing. Then you have vendors, which are providing you edge software and or hardware, but also gateway software and hardware. Well, these solutions are technically true SD-WAN solution, but they're not offered as a service. So you're basically buying network gears for you to build a network. Now, of course, if you're a very large enterprise, that might be very well what you're looking for. You want to build your own private network. If you're a small, medium business, there is no probability that you want to be involved in something like this. That makes absolutely no sense. Even as an MSP, unless you're a very large MSP, why would you want to build a network? And therefore, the same, if you look at a different business model for the same class of products, you see that now suddenly, if your MSP is offering you those same edge devices with a wrapper around them, what you're effectively buying is managed IT services on top of branch routers. That really is not that different than before. It's just that the branch router is a little bit more sophisticated, and it might be sort of bundled under the general umbrella SD-WAN service. But the reality is that's still just a managed IT service wrapper on top of a branch router. So it's not really materially different than what you were getting before. And finally, if you're getting those edge and gateways, devices and gateways, you're really getting an SD-WAN network. And if you're getting it as a service, you're now suddenly as a business subscribing to a network as a service. We believe at Adaptiv Network that in the mid-market, and the SMB space, this is by a long shot the predominant way by which end customers want to procure their SD-WAN solution. We also believe that this is the most frictionless way to actually deploy or deliver or resell an SD-WAN solution for an MSP.
Thanks, Bernard. I think that covers quite a bit of interesting dynamics of looking at the SD-WAN from a technology perspective. Now, if you look at it again from a perspective of businesses and enterprises, the appetite to consume networking technology as a hosted and managed service has increased in past several years. And I believe SD-WAN is no different in that context. If you follow any stats from credible analyst firms, the numbers for businesses that prefer a managed SD-WAN service in some shape or form is upwards of 70%, which is great and definitely suggests a good opportunity for the managed service providers and the communication service providers to play in that market. But if you're an MSP trying to enter or compete in this market, do note that it is becoming crowded marketplace. Not only is every network service provider who has been traditionally offering MPLS is already offering SD-WAN solutions, and then there are some unconventional players such as the SD-WAN vendors themselves, system integrators, or even cloud infrastructure in many cases are entering in this market. So it is highly, highly competitive. So how do you differentiate and maintain your profitability in this crowded market? Well, to me, it takes us back to the foundation of doing any business. As you look into your own solution models in terms of offering managed services, do pay attention to not just the cost of the SD-WAN technology itself, but the overall cost of ownership in creating the managed services around it. Likewise, in order to compete, don't just look into the feature matrix of the product, but also other critical aspects such as time to market, simplification of operations, learning curve that your customers will have, and many others. And last but not the least, look at the potential of growing the business with the investments you're making in building a managed SD-WAN service infrastructure. So with that framework as a reference, let me map some of the solution models Bernard just explained, right? So if we take a look at edge-only solution, they are generally perceived to be a lower cost solution, but at the same time, they offer very little competitiveness. As Bernard was explaining earlier, it's at best a better branch office router. And they're suitable for only a small niche of the market. So from a business growth perspective, that has limitations as well. Now, so if you're building managed services around these kind of a solution, the incremental value of you as an MSP becomes minimal. Whereas a full-blown SD-WAN solution, which Bernard earlier explained, includes the gateway, the orchestrator, etc., offers a lot more richness and capabilities and business growth. But at the same time, it does come with a cost. The cost to build the managed offerings using a full-blown SD-WAN solution is much higher relatively to what you would get from an edge-only solution, and can be daunting. And if your business case is kind of leaning towards selecting an edge-only solution because of those costs, I would suggest you look at some other options as well. So the stage you really want to be in is an option which provides you a good balance between all these three dimensions, right? And I believe the SD-WAN solutions that are available as network as a service models offer that balance. And now, of course, when you're offering network as a service, when you're selecting network as a service, there will definitely be some concerns on your end in terms of the control you have on that cloud infrastructure, the reliability of the solution. If you work with the right partner, that those concerns can definitely be addressed. So Bernard, if you click on the next one, please. So let me explain why network as a service is likely a model which gives you that balance. So I'm going to pick on the total cost of ownership aspect, as that is where I believe most of the confusion lies amongst MSPs. Now, critical data point that you all need to understand is that the edge appliances and the software, the hardware that comes with the SD-WAN solution is only 1/3 of the cost of delivering that managed SD-WAN service. Now, this confusion, when I spoke with several service providers, I'm trying to understand, how do they look at the solution? And one thing which came to a good realization is a lot of service providers, when they're looking at SD-WAN solution, they're looking at from an eye of a typical CPE device they had been selling in the market, likes of branch router and the services that have been provided around that, likes of managed IT services. So when you're looking at the cost of managed SD-WAN services, which is built around a full infrastructure that is needed, or a network that needs to be built around it, they're only looking at a comparison of the edge-only products and edge-only appliance cost, which is not the case. The edge is only 1/3 of the cost. If you are completely on board and building a managed SD-WAN service, which requires a complete full-blown solution that we've been talking about earlier, there's other costs as well that you need to look into. There's cost of private backbone, there's a cost of cloud infrastructure, there's a cost of OSS, BSS, there's a cost of delivery and support. So beyond that first 1/3 of the cost of just the edge devices, there is a cost to build. Nearly 30% of that comes in from a backbone infrastructure, and the rest, 20% from the infrastructure itself, the cloud infrastructure, and the others from delivery and support perspective. So, and that's where the network as a service becomes a lot more logical, because a lot of that cost is already consumed or absorbed by the provider of that network as a service. And you're basically subscribing to that network, and your initial cost of ownership to go to market becomes really low. So if you look at some of the numbers on the right-hand side, that kind of gives you an idea in terms of where those cost breakdowns are. If looking from a cost technology perspective only, there's an edge appliance, there's a gateway, and an orchestrator that typically that middle row would require. And on top of that, there is a recurring cost of the backbone bandwidth of bringing that traffic from the enterprise sites into the core cloud network. So those are the costs that actually become daunting over the period of time. But if you're working with the network service provider or a SD-WAN provider who offers this entire solution package as a service, a lot of that cost goes away, and take you to market quickly. So I'm sure Bernard is going to talk about a lot more in terms of the solution they have and how they're alleviating some of those costs for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that summary, Ashish. Indeed, one of the biggest confusion that exists in the market is comparing the price of an edge appliance with the price of an actual SD-WAN as a service solution. And indeed, you're seeing just the tip of the iceberg as per that beautiful infographic. Let me take you to talk a little bit more about Adaptiv Networks and our take on the SD-WAN market. So let's first start by, in a broad stroke, breaking down the end customer market into two segments. And you'll understand why, because we know that the behavior of end customers is different in terms of both their requirements and their ability to consume SD-WAN in the way they would like to consume SD-WAN or implement an SD-WAN solution. So if you think of the large enterprise market, the large businesses, they have a complex IT stack. They have a large number of branches. They have a lot of legacy, both in their application stack, both in their network. They have a lot of complexity that they will have to deal with, that they will have to deal with when they deploy any new IT solution. And that is not different for SD-WAN. Even for SD-WAN, they will need to deal with that IT complexity. These large customers or large businesses, their deployment of SD-WAN will be, first of all, in almost all cases, alongside their MPLS network. And the MPLS network is not going to go anywhere for a long period of time. But more than that, the SD-WAN that will be implemented will be highly customized to their need. And it's okay, they have the size to be able to deal with that complexity, and they also have the skills to deal with that complexity. And that complexity they actually need, because they have to deal with that very complex IT stack. So whatever it is, they're going to have an SD-WAN solution that can be tweaked to fit their model, whatever business we're talking about. So this is a market Adaptiv Networks is not playing in. This is not our market. We focus on that other market. The market where the IT complexity is a little bit lower, where the number of branches tend to be a little bit less, not because of scalability reason, but simply because those are smaller businesses. These businesses have either entirely or mostly outsourced their IT. They share the fact that most of them have no or low IT skills at the branch. Think of even a large retailer. You will see no IT skills in a retail shop. These businesses do not want to have to bespoke their SD-WAN solution. They want something that is going to provide them that unbreakable access to the digital services that they now so much need in order to deliver, to become that digital first business, but without the cost, without the complexity. And that's the market we're in. We call that at Adaptiv Networks frictionless. And we believe that frictionless is more than just about provisioning. We believe that it is about the way it's purchased as a service, so it's a subscription, so it's easy. The way it's deployed, that's the provisioning. The way it's managed, but also frictionless for the partner. It needs to be simple to resell and implement for the partner. So let's talk about how we do that. But to us, those markets are very different. And we believe that the network as a service market is of prime importance in that market, less so in the large enterprise market, where we will still see, if you remember the chart from Ashish a bit earlier, we will still see a fair amount of do-it-yourself in there, either directly or working with a system integrator. So let's talk about what we do exactly. What is the Adaptiv Networks solution? So first of all, we are a network as a service player. So we provide a full subscription-based model to a SD-WAN network, which is all-inclusive. So when you subscribe to a service with Adaptiv Networks, you get a low-cost edge device, you get the entire network with all the capabilities of the gateways and the network, and all of that is cloud orchestrated. But I'll run you through this. But what's important to understand here is that a lot of the complexity we deal with. And we deal with so that the partner doesn't have to deal with it, such as deploying gateways or an orchestrator, and so that the end customer, the business, does not have to deal with that complexity. But let's start from the edge and let's sort of work our way through that network to see what really happens and what is a true SD-WAN solution. So we believe that in the marketplace we're in, we need the edge device to be reasonably low price so that the subscription can be reasonable in price. And the reason is very simple. Smaller businesses don't get the same economies of scale. Their branches are smaller. Their IT cost as a fraction as a proportion of revenue is 2 to 3 times more than the Fortune 500. So they are more cost sensitive. So we know that we need an SD-WAN solution that is not only simple, but is also affordable in that market. So those edge devices are not only reasonably low cost, but they also, and frankly, the cost is for us to bear because it's a network as a service, so it includes the edge device. But the importance is not only the cost, it's also the scalability angle. One of the less frictionless aspects in IT is having to replace a piece of hardware. So we always ensure that the edge devices that are deployed have ample opportunities for bandwidth increase. And we provide a high level of scalability. And we do that because we can do all of the heavy lifting in the core network. So we keep the edge software as lean as can be. Now, of course, there's some functions that have to be done at the edge, and that's where they're done. But some functions that can be done in the gateways, we're doing them in the gateways instead, where we have an opportunity to have much more horsepower and CPU capabilities than at the edge. Now, thanks to the fact that we do have, of course, we use multiple local loops or internet connection from the edge. Depending on the device, you can have up to 7 of them. And we always create that tunnel to the gateway. And that's very important because by doing that, we change the demarcation point from a digital service standpoint. Whatever you're consuming in the cloud is actually seeing the gateway as the end IP address. And that means that we don't rely on the local loops for any of the IP or the addressing. So the routing is done from the gateway, and if one of the underlay go down, let's say that you have one of the DSL link goes down and you have, say, an LT passive failover, which is all part of that overlay, there really won't be much, there won't be a failover that will be completely seamless because the actual tunnel has remained completely intact and the digital services are still seeing exactly the same IP address, and all there might be is a bit of a packet retransmit on a TCP transaction. Now, we operate those multi-tenant gateways, and let me talk about that. Now, the edge device always talks to the gateway, which is essentially a concentrator, and we have a number of gateways which are interconnected with one another, effectively forming a private mesh. And the beauty of this is that when you have data transiting from edge to edge, it does not go in the public internet other than the local loop, for which we are able to QoS bidirectionally on that link and the other links, really providing what we call edge-to-edge bidirectional QoS. Now, the gateways are fully multi-tenant, so is the orchestrator. Multi-tenancy in a network as a service where we sell through partners, and that's the only go-to-market for Adaptiv Networks, we never sell directly to the end customer. We know it's very important for our partners to be able to sell an SD-WAN solution, offer an SD-WAN as a service solution without having to deploy an orchestrator or their own gateways, which would be sort of the model that we described before, which is you're building a network. So the multi-tenancy of our platform allows us to create essentially new tenants for any new partner without any overhead in terms of the infrastructure. So there is no upfront cost and there's no upfront complexity. Again, it's part of our promise of offering something that is seamless and that is frictionless. And finally, we have a sales accelerator, which we call it the Adaptiv Partner, because we know that being frictionless has to do also with how you engage with your own salespeople and how you have access to quality marketing material so that you can quickly get up to speed, get certified on the solution, and engage with your customers so that you can be most effective at demonstrating the value you can bring to them when it's relevant. There will be cases where you will have customers that will say, oh, I'm too small and I don't need an SD-WAN solution, and that might be true. Until they fully embark on a digitalization strategy to become a digital first business. That might be the case. And there may be very large businesses that are saying, well, I want a private network. And in that case, we're not the right solution. There are plenty of good solutions there. So to wrap things up a little bit here, the Adaptiv SD-WAN network as a service, what it truly does is that it reduces the TCO, allows you to increase the margin, and very importantly, there is no hidden cost. You just have complete control of your cost, so you know exactly the margins you're in, and you have no CapEx or initial investment to get going in the SD-WAN space. So this is really part of our promise of providing a frictionless solution, which has to be frictionless not only for the end customer, but also for the partner. The infrastructure has no hidden cost. The backbone, the gateways, the orchestrator, the edge device, all of that is included in the service. We help you with the customer acquisition thanks to the sales and marketing material that we make available readily and at no cost. We take care of the CPE logistics, the upgrades, the tier 2 and tier 3 support, and the equipment is plug and play, making it very easy to deploy an SD-WAN solution. So ultimately, you have access to great technology with no initial investment and in a way that will ensure that you have profit, but that profit will be well structured and very predictable. So to conclude, the digital first businesses, they all need unbreakable agile cloud connectivity. Now let me point out that businesses today that are not working towards becoming digital first businesses will not be there in a couple of decades. Businesses really have to think about, do they want to be Sears or do they want to be Amazon? And we know what happened there when someone answered that question. There is no question that the world is going digital. The way we interact with services and businesses is going digital. And if businesses are not becoming digital first business. They might not need SD-WAN, but they certainly might not be in business either in a couple of decades. Businesses, especially in the mid-market and in the SMB space, they want managed SD-WAN. Now, I will not say that this is entirely true for the large enterprises. I think many of the very large enterprises have their own very large, very competent, centralized IT organization, which is effectively a private managed service provider in some ways, and they will deploy their own managed SD-WAN, so to say. So effectively, that still is a do-it-your-own environment. But in the mid-market and the SMB space, we're going to see none of that. So managed SD-WAN is the only way to go. We believe that MSP must be very careful in evaluating the options that are there, especially when you think about, am I offering SD-WAN or am I simply offering a glorified router? Now, I think the customers ultimately will speak for themselves because of the limitation of an edge-only solution, not only from a TCO and then from a capability standpoint, but also from the perspective of what is the value proposition? Is the value proposition the one I really want, of that unbreakable access to those digital services in a way that is quality control? And most of the edge devices, in fact, all of them, can do that simply because you lack the endpoint. And without the endpoint in the network, you truly have no ability to completely control what's going on. And finally, we believe that at Adaptiv Networks, we do have an SD-WAN solution, which is sold as a service, that reduces the TCO, increases your margins, and make them very predictable. And we do that in a way that is also cognizant of the market that we're addressing. That market, which is the mid-market and the SMB space, a market that is more price sensitive. So we make every effort in the way we construct our service to ensure that we don't introduce costs that we will all regret, ultimately some costs that someone will have to bear. Just to finish, I'd like to say that on our website, we have a beautiful, much more detailed infographic on the topic that we talked about today, which really provides you a lot of insights about where to look for what I would call hidden costs. I think that's one of the biggest elements to look for, is where are those hidden costs? Because you can be lured into thinking that, okay, we've got that edge device, it's $800 edge device, it does 50 megabit per second, that's all my customer need. I'll sell him that edge device and we're good to go, and that's SD-WAN. First of all, that edge device probably doesn't deliver the services your end customer wants, but above and beyond that, it's a 50 megabit per second edge router. The day your customer goes to 100 megabit per second, that needs to be upgraded. Oops, that's now a $1,500 device. But more than that, you as an MSP will have now to manage that device. You can have, if you're talking about a customer with dozens of endpoints, now you have to manage a very complex VPN mesh. And ultimately, you're still not delivering what the end customer is looking for. So that infographic really provides you a lot of really interesting data points to help you understand really where are the hidden costs and why we believe that a network as a service solution where we've made all efforts to keep the price in check, which is important, because I wouldn't say that all network as a service solution out there are cost effective, but certainly Adaptiv Networks network as a service solution is cost effective. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. And of course, we have a plethora of very high quality material on our website, including that infographic. With now that being said, we're open for questions.
Thanks, Bernard. This is Todd. I just wanted to let you know, I guess we did see a couple of questions come in. We're a couple of minutes already over. So if anybody leaves, don't worry, I will follow up directly, and you can coordinate any questions with me. I'll make sure you get an answer. I'm also going to send out the slides and the recording to all the attendees for today's session to make sure that you have access to that. We did have a question about the pricing. We talked a lot about that, but Bernard, if there's anything you can share about sort of like the pricing that we have for the entry-level SMB customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to pricing, I think the most important thing to know is what's the pricing model. And the pricing model at Adaptiv Networks is, as I said a bit earlier, all inclusive. So you don't have to buy an edge device, you don't have a subscription to a cloud orchestrator or any of that. All you have is a price for a bandwidth. So if you have, for example, a 100 megabit per second bandwidth at the edge, irrespectively of the features that are activated at the edge or in the core. You pay a price per month. I mean, that's basically how it is. It's as a service, just like the way you pay for Salesforce. You commit to a subscription, and then you basically pay per month or per year, depending on the model that you work with. So this is really how we work, and it's fairly simple. It doesn't get any simpler than that, in fact. And our prices range in the range is from about $50 a month to $700 a month on very high bandwidth. So that's sort of the range to expect, and that's pretty much it.
Okay. The other question we got is about how fast our solution can go. I guess that's for the edge bandwidth speed.
Yeah, so we have depending on the bandwidth that you will subscribe, because of course here this is an as a service model, so you don't actually buy a piece of hardware. We will select the piece of hardware that is needed to be provisioned for the bandwidth that you have opted to go for. We provide anywhere from 15 megabit per second to 2 gigabit per second, depending on your requirements, of course. Now, I want to point out, though, that there's been a trend in the industry, and I would say CSPs are maybe a little bit, when it comes to internet services, they are a little bit the culprits here, is that there's been a lot of cases where you've been sold bandwidth to solve a problem that has nothing to do with bandwidth. And we at Adaptiv Networks, we operate the network, so we see the amount of bandwidth our customers actually utilize. And I can tell you that the vast majority of customers utilize less than 1% of their bandwidth right now. And the reason is that you've been sold, basically, you had a problem with latency or quality of service. Because the fact that you use an average of 1% bandwidth on a 1 megabit per second link doesn't mean that your link is never congested. And you're having issues with quality. Maybe your latency is bad, maybe your voice sometimes doesn't work well, and you've been sold more bandwidth as if it was going to solve that problem. In most cases, that's nothing to do with the problem. The fact that you're congested with 100 megabit per second, you'll still be congested with 200 megabit per second when an employee downloads a big file. It's going to use the entire pipe no matter what. So the reality is that we see a lot of customers that are asking for a lot of bandwidth, when in reality what they have is a quality of service problem. So one thing that we've seen is that in many cases, instead of having hundreds of megabits of internet, if you go with 25 or 50 megabit per second SD-WAN, you'll have a much better quality service than with just a DIE at a higher bandwidth. Kind of a long answer to a simple question, but I thought it was an important distinction to make, because that's very common. We see that very commonly in the industry.
That's a good point. So I guess I think that's about it for the questions. It looks like we got a couple of them all answered. And yeah, I wanted to say thank you to Ashish for his participation today, and Bernard, great job. Thanks for sharing these insights. And I thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Have a good day there. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.